let me begin how this project came into being. My father died in 1989, and I was made the executor of the intellectual property. And at the time, there were 44 letters from Jung to my father. Some of them had already been published in either the collected letters or in the journal of the Los Angeles Institute, Psych Perspectives. So I tucked the letters into a safe deposit box and thought I had nothing more to do with them. Because I thought, I'm separated from my father, that's it. But then there was a chance meeting, and a woman sandplay therapist named Sasha Rosen, a former Berkeley sandplay therapist now living in Kent, England, and she called me and she said, "Tom, do you know that the complete correspondence of your father to Jung is in the ETH archive of Jung?" And I said, "No, I did not know that." So there it was, and this was 2003. So I contacted the archive in Zurich, and contrary to my expectations, it took me 9 months for them to send me the letters. The Swiss also had to make cutbacks in government services, so that it took that long for me to get the letters. And then I had my secretary, who was Swiss, translate the letters into English. And that's when I realized that this was more than just for me alone, that there were some things, there were some topics that were covered that needed a more general exposition. So, number one, and really almost the first half of the correspondence, is Jung's attitude towards Jews and his supposedly anti-Semitic views. These were strongly challenged by my father in his correspondence with Jung in 1934. And as far as I know, these are the only letters that Jung actually answers some of the questions about anti-Semitism and the Nazis. And these are the kind of questions that many of us in the last, since the last 60, 70 years would, my father asked Jung the kind of questions I think many of us would have liked to ask him, because it's been such a controversial and hot topic. Anyway, it was those letters that, when I saw that made me think that this material needs to get published because of its primary documentation. Now, one huge shadow side of my father, and what probably brought him into analysis in the first place, was his over-involvement with his women patients. He could not seem to keep his hands off many of his women patients. My mother was one of those patients. Yes. So, now he had a large practice in Berlin, and when the Nazis came into power in Germany in 1933, she had been recently widowed. She followed, my father recommended to all his Jewish patients especially to leave Germany. He says it was dangerous. So he went to Palestine because he had been a Zionist in an earlier age. And he said that Hitler was out to destroy the Jewish population of Germany. This is 1933. Jung thought that my father was crazy to leave Germany and that the Nazis would be out of power in a very short time. The boundary problem did not stop with his relationship to my mother. because he continued to have those kind of issues with other women in his practice, and I think it hurt him professionally quite a bit. And he finally, in the last 5 minutes, or rather the last letters between Jung and my father, he kind of confesses the problem, and Jung scolds him, and actually that's one of the things, one of the many things that I learned from this was that Jung saw my father as a very creative and intellectually interesting, and had a deep relationship to his unconscious and to the spiritual side of his psyche. But he also realized that he had a lot of problems, and Jung, reading the correspondence, I realized that Jung took care of him. I mean, as his analyst and therapist throughout Jung's life. I'm going to begin a little bit, just give you a little bit more biographical information about my father. I'm not going to bore you with too many details, but it was interesting. He was born in Guatemala City in 1901. He came from an Orthodox Jewish business background. And there were many Jewish people who came. As we in San Francisco know many of the Haas family, the Levi family. A lot of business people came and started businesses all over the United States, but also Central and South America. And my father's father, I never met him, was in the button business. But my father reacted against the materialistic bias of the family. So his mother brought the family back to Berlin, to Germany, in 1907, because they wanted the children to have a good education. And the father remained in Guatemala City, but he saw his father every 2 years, except there was a little thing called World War I, so he didn't see him for 9 years. And my father certainly had a hunch that his father had a second Indian family in Guatemala. So when my father met Jung became the father figure for my father for the rest of his life. He graduated from Heidelberg Medical School in 1923. And Heidelberg Medical School is like was the best of medicine in Germany. It would be like going to Harvard or Yale or something like that. He opened up a private practice in 1923, and he got into a Jungian lay analysis with Tony Zussman for 4 years. And then in 1928, he wrote to Jung asking if he would see him in analysis, and then there began the 32-year correspondence. My father was not happy. He felt that the fanaticism of the early Zionists in Palestine was as bad as the Nazism in Germany. I hope that doesn't offend anyone. And so he divorced his first wife and married my mother, and they moved to England in 1935. And I'm sure that he was prepared to spend the rest of his professional life in England had not World War II come along, where it looked like, at the time that England was attacked by the Germans, every other country had fallen very quickly. So he had these two uncles in San Francisco and got a quick affidavit And we left on a boat. I can tell you that the crossing of the Atlantic, I was 4 years old, was pretty, we got attacked almost every day by German U-boats, and we spent quite a bit of time at the life rafts in case, one of those attacks, were successful. But we made it across. We had a big convoy. We ended up in Ellis Island, and they lost our papers. And I was questioned at Ellis Island by a reporter. I was 4 years old, and I was asked, because we were one of the first boats to actually make it across. The U-boats were sinking a lot of tonnage at the time. And I was asked how I liked Ellis Island. And I said, I like this hotel very much. So, Werner Engel, who some of you may have heard of, who had made it already to New York, read that on the subway in New York, and so he saw that we had arrived. And so he came down and picked us up and got us out of Ellis Island. So anyway, that's New York was not very favorable towards my parents as analysts. And so they came west to San Francisco and to see my dad's uncles. And on the way back, he stopped in Los Angeles and saw this wonderful wasteland, and it looked like Tel Aviv where he'd lived, and all these wonderful beaches. And so we settled in Los Angeles and became the first Jung. And he and my mother started a Jung group in Los Angeles, which is the one that's still there today. So. There was a general medical society in Germany and Jung was the vice president of it. So Jung was asked to become the president of this organization. And he did it reluctantly, and he made the condition that the organization now become international. And the first meeting of this organization was in Bad Nauheim in May or April of '34, and it's actually the article that everyone quotes when they want to say that Jung was anti-Semitic. It's called The Current State of Psychotherapy. It's in volume 10, and the thing that people don't like is that Jung says that there are different psychologies. There's the Chinese psychology, there's Jewish psychology, there's Aryan psychology, and they're very different. And what he says about the Jewish psychology is that they require a host culture and to really blossom, that they have never formed a culture of their own. Okay? That's the statement that gets psychoanalysts, whoever, Jewish people of all sorts, and they just want to say, slam dunk, forget about Jung. Because he clearly was a racist, anti-Semite, and the language is too similar to what the Nazis were saying about the Jews as parasites. My father has read that article. My father was living in Tel Aviv and had seen Jung the previous summer at the Eranos meeting where Jung had no time for him. And here's what he says. First of all, I have to tell you that in Ascona, as well as here in Palestine, I heard reports about some of your remarks which did not present you as a friend of the Jews. At this distance, of course, I was unable to verify what you actually said. For instance, it appears that you said that Jews are not honest in analysis. Then, this is a psychoanalyst came to Palestine, Gustav Bali, appeared in Palestine, visited with all our colleagues, and stated publicly that you had openly crossed over to Hitler, that you had been received by him, and thus you are an anti-Semite. The result was that your books, which had been displayed in many bookstores, disappeared from the shop windows, and your name was placed on the boycott list. Goes on. Well, dear doctor, the rumors about your being anti-Semitic do not appear to be dying down. In a letter I received from Germany last week, someone wrote me that you had expressed on the radio, via German broadcasting stations, your gratitude for and recognition of Hitler's reforms at the German universities. Hitler got rid of all the Jews in teaching at the university, and then, of course, they burned all of Freud's books. If that is a fact, I do not understand how you, as a Swiss, please don't interpret my letter as being aggressive. I am merely attempting to understand you in this respect and hope that you will grant me the privilege of reaching such an understanding. On the other hand, I don't feel understood by you in this matter. Later on in the same letter, about the Jews, you write, the Jew, as far as one can see, will never create his own form of culture because all his instincts and talents presuppose a more or less civilized host people for their development. Now, I would like to, at this point, go over something which I think is very complicated in a way, and it's hard, and you can interpret it in many ways, and I'm happy to have your reactions. Okay, Volume 10, this current state of psychotherapy. About the Jews needing a host culture has been open to many different interpretations. Some of them positive for Jews, and others demonstrating Jung's anti-Semitism, as this is the pivotal point of Jung's interpretation of what Jewish psychology meant for him. The issue keeps raising its ugly head today as to what Jung meant in 1934 by the term host culture. So, I'm thankful to John Beebe for this because he looked up the word host and how it was used in Germany in the late 1920s. The German word is Wirtsvolk, and it was a perfectly neutral term and was found in the Jüdische Lexikon, a 4-volume reference work published between 1927 and 1930, and which was also found in Freud's library. In this context, host is an anthropological term. The Nazis used the term in its darker biological sense, and then the word became parasitic. For the Nazis, the Jew was a parasite on the Aryan culture, and the Jew had to be eradicated. So the big question is, how did Jung mean the term host? It has led students of Jung, both those in favor of him and those against him, in a quandary of how to take the term host. We cannot be sure. But one imagines that Jung meant the term in the anthropological non-Nazi sense. Or, I do not believe that my father would have accepted that what Jung had to say about Jews if Jung had meant it in the Nazi sense. Now, Hitler only assumed full powers in 1934, and it was then that the term Wirtsvolk really assumed its full Nazi meaning. However one wants to interpret this sentence in Jung, one cannot come to a definitive interpretation which will satisfy everyone. A lot of people asked Jung to write something. It's kind of like Pope Pius during the war in Italy. He has kind of a similar stigma attached to him, and the question was, do you defend yourself or not? Jung decided that he would not publicly, but he talked to his Jewish colleagues. I'm going to read the whole letter because you asked for it. My dear Kirsch, gives me great pleasure that you've written me again. See, they've been out of contact. It appears that amusing rumors are being spread about me. The only unquestionable fact which lies behind all of this stupid gossip is that as the honorary chairman of the International Society for Psychotherapy, I could not desert the society. I was urgently requested by the German physicians to retain this position, and I've consequently done what anyone else would have done in my situation, namely my duty towards the International Society. Essentially, this consisted in preserving the umbrella organization and incorporating the German society into it. This plan succeeded at the last Nauheim Congress, and we can also register the gratifying fact that at my suggestion, a special paragraph was adopted which makes it possible for German Jewish physicians to join the international organization as individual members, because of course they could not join the German society. Thus they have become full members with equal rights. I need hardly mention the other rumors. It is a downright lie to maintain that I said Jews are dishonest in analysis. People must think me extraordinarily stupid if they think I could hold such an idiotic opinion. Neither have I addressed Hitler over the radio or in any other manner, nor have I expressed anything concerning politics. Jung tried to be very apolitical. With regard to my view that as far as one can see, the Jews will not create their own form of culture, this view is based, number one, on historical facts, and two, the additional fact that the specific cultural contribution of the Jew evolves most clearly within a host culture, where the Jew frequently becomes the very carrier of this culture or its promoter. This task is so unique and demanding that it is hardly to be conceived how, in addition, any individual Jewish culture could arise alongside it. Since Palestine represents a very unique condition, I have cautiously inserted, and he uses the German word voraussichtlich, which means as far as one can see. I would in no way deny the possibility that something unique is being created there, but I don't know that as yet. I positively cannot discover anything anti-Semitic in this position. Regarding your suggestion that I write a special piece about this question, this has already been anticipated in that I suggested an exchange of letters with Dr. Neumann, who has worked with me and now also lives in Palestine, which would deal with all the contentious questions. The Jewish Christ complex. This is something that Jung and my father talked about for 32 years. Is a very remarkable business. As you know, I completely agree with you in this respect. The existence of this complex predisposes to a somewhat hystericized general mental attitude which has become especially clear to me in the course of the present anti-Christian agitation. The mere fact that I speak of a difference between Jewish and Christian psychology suffices for anyone to voice the prejudice that I am an anti-Semite, or in the opinion of the Schweiz Israelitische Wochenblatt, for instance, my assertion that I'm just as little an anti-Semite as an anti-Chinese proves my intention to compare the Jew with a Mongolian horde. This sensitivity is simply pathological and makes every discussion almost impossible. As you know, Freud previously accused me of anti-Semitism because I could not tolerate his soulless materialism. With this readiness to snuff out anti-Semitism everywhere, the Jew directly evokes anti-Semitism. I cannot see why the Jew, like any other so-called Christian, is incapable of accepting that he is being personally criticized when one has an opinion about him. Why must it always be assumed that one wants to condemn the Jewish people? Surely the individual is not the people. I regard this as an inadmissible meaning of silencing one's adversary. In the great majority of cases, I've been getting along very well with my Jewish patients and colleagues, and that is true. It happens in the cases of other people, too, that I have to criticize the individual, but they don't ascribe it to the fact that they are English, American, or French. However, there's one exception I'd like to mention here, and that is the German. It has happened to me that more than once that when I criticize an individual German, he immediately concludes that I am a hater of Germans. So it is really too cheap to try to hide one's own inferiority behind a political prejudice. So if you perceive my reserved attitude in Ascona as anti-Semitism, you missed the mark completely. I've already told you what gave rise to my attitude then. In your place, I advise you to work towards advancing clarity in this respect. You can refer to the objective results of the Nauheim Congress, which makes it clear beyond all doubt that I can't be an anti-Semite. In general, you really ought to know me well enough not to attribute me uncritically a non-individual stupidity like anti-Semitism. You know well enough to what extent I approach each person as a personality. When I endeavor to lift out of the collective conditioning and make one into an individual. This, as you also know, is only possible if one acknowledges one's particularity, with which one is endowed by fate. No one who is a Jew can become a human being without knowing he is a Jew, since this is the basis from which he must reach out towards a higher humanity. This holds true for all nations and races. Nationalism is therefore a conditio sine qua non, no matter how objectionable it is. But the individual must not remain stuck in it. On the other hand, insofar as he is in a particle of the mass of the people, he must not elevate himself above it either. As a human being, I am a European. As an atom of the masses, I am a Swiss bourgeois, domiciled at 228 Seestrasse, Küsnacht, near Zurich. I hope these explanations are sufficient for you. Otherwise, I'll have to offer you witnesses and references who would testify under oath to the truth of my statement. In judicial language, this is called, quote, probative tenders, unquote. When you see Dr. Neumann, please greet him from me and remind him that I'm waiting to hear from him. Finally, I want to inform you that my new book, Wirklichkeit der Seele, has appeared. I've included in it a Jewish author, an Old Testament psychologist, in order to annoy the National Socialists and all those Jews who have decried me as an anti-Semite. Finally, I want to inform you that my new book, Wirklichkeit der Seele, has appeared. I've included in it a Jewish author, an Old Testament psychologist, in order to annoy the National Socialists and all those Jews who have decried me as an anti-Semite. The next thing that will be invented now is that I suffer from a complete absence of convictions and am neither an anti-Semite nor a Nazi. We happen to live in a period which overflows with lunacy. And I have to tell you, this letter, from then on, my dad was a complete defender of Jung for the rest of his life.